Hello, everyone. Tonight we step into a space most people avoid. The kind of space where your mind, if trained well enough, becomes so still, so deliberate that it stops arguments before they begin. You've met that person before. In the office, at the dinner table, they don't shout, they don't scramble, they just watch. Calm. Like they've already played this game before, 10 moves ahead. And in that silence, everyone else feels a little exposed. Because a strong mind doesn't react, it reveals. But let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, why did I say that? Why did they get under my skin so easily? It's not because they were smarter. It's not because you were weak. It's because your mind, like most, was trained to defend, not to observe. And that's what we'll build here. A mind like deep water, still but powerful, a presence that speaks even when you don't. You don't have to become cruel to be unshakable. You don't have to outtalk anyone to win. You just need to learn how to walk through storms without bending to the wind. So if that sounds like a journey worth taking, hit like. Leave a comment, especially if someone ever called you too sensitive. Subscribe if you're ready to turn that sensitivity into silent strength. And if today hurt a little more than usual, this might be the place where that hurt becomes wisdom. Now let's begin with silence. Part 1, the silent power. Why the strongest minds speak the least. There's a story completely unverified and likely untrue about a man named Gregory who once worked in a government office where the coffee machine was more feared than the boss. Every Monday morning, this machine would spit hiss, then explode into a cloud of steam as if announcing the start of a gladiator match rather than a work week. People avoided Gregory, not because he was mean, but because he never spoke unless absolutely necessary. He never commented on the weather, never reacted to jokes, never even said good morning. Instead, he sipped his coffee, black no sugar, and listened. And that's exactly why people talked about him endlessly. Some said he was a retired spy. Others swore he was emotionally unavailable due to a tragic past involving an accordion and 3 swans. The truth? He was just tired of wasting words. You see, in a world that teaches us to always have something to say to post, to argue, to clap back, to clarify, the quiet ones become terrifying because they suggest they already know something you don't. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, why do we often associate silence with danger? Why does a calm face in an argument provoke more fear than a shouting one? The answer may lie not in what's said, but in what's withheld. A truly strong mind doesn't need to blurt. It waits, it watches. It listens not to reply, but to understand. That alone is rare enough to be mistaken for mystery or even threat. There's a concept in Stoic philosophy called ataraxia, the absence of mental disturbance. A person with ataraxia doesn't flinch at insult, doesn't jump to defend. Why? Because they've separated themselves from needing validation. And nothing is more unsettling to someone who thrives on attention than a person who needs none. Imagine this: 2 people are arguing. One of them is shouting, pacing, veins bulging. The other is seated, relaxed, simply breathing. Who has the power in that moment? Now, a side note, silence is not always a virtue. There are times when speaking up is moral, even necessary. But we're not talking about moral silence here. We're talking about psychological posture, a deliberate withdrawal from noise to preserve clarity. Let me give you an example. There was a woman named Lee, a senior engineer at a startup filled with idea guys. You know the type. Loud, excited, constantly suggesting things like, let's pivot to crypto, or let's build a drone that delivers coffee. Lee rarely responded. She just nodded, then went back to her designs. Until one day during a crisis meeting, the CEO looked at her and said, "Lee, you haven't said much. What do you think?" She calmly replied, "I think the product doesn't work. The deadline's unrealistic and everyone here is allergic to facts." There was dead silence, then applause, because when silent people finally speak, their words land like bricks. But let's go deeper. Why is speaking less a sign of strength? Because it implies restraint. And restraint implies mastery. Think about it. Anyone can react. It takes nothing to blurt out a thought, an insult, a defense. But to hold it, observe it, let it pass like a cloud across your awareness, that's strength. That's the gym your mind needs to train in, resisting the urge to explain yourself, resisting the temptation to win the argument, resisting the fear of not being heard. It's not that you don't have thoughts, it's that you've learned not all thoughts need to be shared, and that unsettles people. Because most of society is built on the illusion that being loud equals being right. But here's a gentle suggestion. What if the person who says the least is the one who sees the most? Now let's return briefly to Gregory the office enigma. He wasn't smarter than anyone else. He just realized that most conversations were games of ego tennis. Instead of swinging back, he let the ball fall. He noticed how people filled the silence with nervous laughter, how they overshared in the absence of interruption, how revealing they became when no one competed to be heard. Gregory had no special powers. He simply chose observation over reaction. And in that choice, he became powerful. Of course, silence can be misinterpreted. Some may call it passive, cold, even arrogant. But remember, you are not responsible for how others interpret your calm. You are responsible for your peace. A strong mind isn't built overnight. It's carved out through the quiet refusal to be baited, through the patient understanding that some battles are better left unfought, and that sometimes saying nothing is the loudest response. So here's your invitation. Try it. The next time someone pokes at your ego, stay still. Breathe. Say nothing. Watch what happens. You might just terrify them, and you'll begin to feel something deep inside, not superiority, not smugness, but sovereignty. The kind of sovereignty no one can give you and no one can take. And that is where your training truly begins. Part 2. Break your own illusions before the world does. There's an old, thoroughly false legend, like the kind that clings to the corners of Reddit and campfires, about a man named Calvin who believed he could read minds. He wasn't a magician. He wasn't psychic, but he was very, very confident. He'd walk into meetings and finish other people's sentences. He'd interrupt with, "I already know what you're going to say," or offer unsolicited advice like, "You're only angry because your father didn't hug you enough." Naturally, people avoided him like expired yogurt. Then one day, someone asked Calvin a question he couldn't answer. "What's the last thing you were wrong about?" He blinked, laughed, changed the subject. And in that moment, his illusion cracked, not because anyone exposed him, but because for a split second, he saw himself. There is no terror greater than realizing you've built your life on a thought that isn't true, that you've protected ideas not because they were right, but because they were yours. We all do it. We construct mental palaces where we're always the misunderstood genius, the secretly good person, the noble victim. And inside those stories, we hide from growth. Because growth often sounds like this. What if I'm the problem? What if my anger is masking fear? What if the narrative I tell myself is a cage I decorated with fairy lights? Here's a quiet truth. The strongest minds break themselves before the world has to. not out of self-hatred, but out of reverence for reality. Now let's talk illusions and how to start noticing them. One of the biggest illusions we cling to is the belief that our thoughts are facts. You feel ignored. That must mean you're unlovable. You were rejected. That must mean you're not enough. You're not successful yet. That must mean you never will be. But thoughts are just visitors. They knock. Some shout, a few cry, but they're not laws. They're not prophecies. They're just whispers, and you get to decide which ones stay for tea. Most people never challenge their thoughts because it's painful to admit you've been wrong about something for years, especially if that something is you. But here's where it gets interesting. People who do this, who dare to question their inner monologue, they start to glow differently. Not because they've fixed themselves, but because they're no longer afraid of finding out they're imperfect. They're already friends with that truth. Let's bring in an imaginary character named Dana. Dana spent years believing she was too intense for people. Every relationship ended the same way, someone saying, "You're a bit much." So she dimmed her light, bit her tongue, smiled politely. Then one day, on a solo trip to nowhere in particular, she asked herself, what if they just didn't have the capacity for me? What if I'm not too much, I'm just in the wrong rooms? She didn't magically become confident after that, but she stopped shrinking herself for the comfort of others. Why? Because she broke the illusion that she was the problem. And that illusion, cracked gently, not smashed, gave her mind room to breathe. Here's a philosophy. Pill to chew on slowly. The unexamined belief is the root of most suffering. That doesn't mean you need to obsess over every thought like it's a sacred text. But it does mean that when a belief begins to limit you, it's time to hold it up to the light and ask, where did you come from? Are you here to protect me or imprison me? Do I still need you? You'd be surprised how many beliefs don't survive that kind of scrutiny. Of course, self-inquiry can be terrifying. Most people would rather stay confused and comfortable than clear and conflicted, but here's the deal: you will be exposed by life, by failure, by other people's mirrors. So why not do it on your own terms? Break the illusion before the fallout. Choose the discomfort of truth before the world makes the choice for you. Because once you do that, you become a little harder to manipulate, a little harder to provoke, a little less desperate for praise or terrified of rejection. And that ironically makes you magnetic. Not perfect, but solid. Remember Calvin, the mind reader who couldn't admit a single mistake. He wasn't terrifying because he was strong. He was tragic because he was fragile. His whole identity was a stage play, and deep down he knew it. That's why he had to perform constantly. Strong minds don't perform. They rest, they watch, they adjust. They know that illusions will always try to return, but now they have the tools to greet them, smile politely, and show them the door. So here's your invitation. Pick one belief you have carried for years, something you think is true about yourself. Now ask, who benefits when I believe this? What would I do differently if I didn't believe it? Don't rush the answer. Just let it echo around your awareness for a while. The response may come as a whisper or a storm. Either way, it's yours now. And if that feels uncomfortable, good. It means you've begun the work most people never start. This journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about unlearning who you were told to be so you can remember who you already are. And in that remembering, your mind becomes a place no illusion can survive. Part 3. Training the Unshakable Mind. Discomfort as a daily ritual. There once was a kingdom utterly fictional and likely borrowed from 3 different fables where the royal advisor was a man named Fenwick. Fenwick had one job: ensure the prince would one day become a wise and unshakable king. But the prince was foiled. Every room was warmed before he entered. Every meal was seasoned to his exact preference. Every voice around him agreed. So Fenwick did something radical. He removed the prince's pillow. This naturally caused a royal crisis. The next morning, the prince stormed into court, sleep-deprived and furious. "I tossed all night," he shouted. "There was nothing to cushion my head." Fenwick bowed. "Precisely, Your Grace. You have ruled for years on cushions. Let us begin now on stone. Comfort is a subtle assassin. It whispers, 'You deserve rest even when you haven't earned it.' It says, 'Avoid this.' It's too hard even when that thing is exactly what would make you stronger. And worst of all, it cloaks itself in self-care when really it's just the fear of discomfort dressed in a velvet robe. But discomfort, small voluntary daily doses, is how we train the mind not to flinch. You don't become unshakable by reading affirmations. You become unshakable by shaking on purpose and learning you're still standing afterward. Let's clarify something. We're not talking about punishing yourself. We're not advocating cold showers in winter while screaming Stoic quotes into the abyss. We're talking about calculated friction, just enough to teach your nervous system, I can survive this. Examples: choosing the stairs when the elevator beckons, delaying that coffee for an hour, starting a conversation that makes your hands sweat, telling someone no when your throat begs you to people please. These are not dramatic acts, but they are rituals of rewilding, bringing your mind back from the soft couch of certainty. Let's meet another imaginary friend, Jules. Jules was terrified of public speaking, not just nervous, terrified. Like dry mouth, heart palpitations, please let the building catch fire level of terrified. So she joined a weekly improv group. Yes, improv. Where people shout banana and pretend to be furniture. Every week she stood in front of strangers, humiliated herself joyfully, and left shaking. After 3 months, something odd happened. A work presentation came up. She didn't panic, not because the fear vanished, but because her mind had learned, I've been more uncomfortable than this. And I lived. That is what training does. It gives your mind a library of experience to borrow courage from. Here's a question worth asking. When was the last time you did something hard on purpose? Not because life forced you, not because a deadline loomed, but because you chose to get uncomfortable just to grow. If you can't remember, don't worry, you're not broken. You're just undertrained. And the good news is, training can start now. There's a phrase I love from the Stoics. The obstacle is the way. It sounds poetic, even Instagrammable, but beneath that is steel. They meant the thing you're avoiding. That's your curriculum, your fear, your classroom, your resistance, your invitation. Because the mind left unchallenged becomes soft, easily triggered, constantly seeking anesthesia in the form of scrolling sugar approval. But the mind that meets discomfort and stays with it, breathes through it, doesn't flee. That mind becomes terrifyingly composed. It doesn't panic at uncertainty. It doesn't beg for reassurance. It just endures. And that, ironically, is how people start listening when you finally speak. Let's return briefly to our fictional Prince of Pillows. Over time, Fenwick removed more than just the cushion. He took away the royal bath salts. He replaced the silk sheets with coarse wool. He invited dissenting voices to the court. At first, the prince sulked, raged, even plotted against Fenwick, but one day during a sudden flood, the prince didn't scream. He waded into the rising water and started organizing rescue efforts. People followed not because he shouted orders, but because he didn't collapse. Fenwick smiled quietly in the shadows. Training was complete. Here's the truth. If you wait for life to harden you, it will, but it won't ask permission. You'll be blindsided, knocked flat, confused why no one told you how to cope. But if you choose your discomfort daily, you train your mind to adapt, adjust, and stand tall before the storm even begins. So tonight or tomorrow, ask yourself, what's one thing I can do today that makes me slightly uncomfortable, but deeply proud? Then do it. Tiny, intentionally, with care, like picking up a small stone each day. One day you'll turn around and realize you've built a fortress. This isn't about becoming a monk on a mountain. It's about becoming someone who doesn't crumble every time the Wi-Fi lags or a comment stings. It's about building a library of resilience so rich that when pain shows up, as it always does, you have somewhere solid to sit. That's how unshakable minds are made. One chosen discomfort at a time. So here's your practice tomorrow. One small thing that makes you wince. Not suffer, not break, just wince. Then breathe. Notice. Don't run. Over time, your mind will stop interpreting discomfort as danger. It will start reading it as growth. And when that happens, you'll become the kind of person who doesn't just survive the hard parts, but trains in them. Welcome to the dojo. Part 4. Emotional Aikido Deflect, Don't React. There was once a man, we'll call him Barry because he absolutely does not exist, who believed every insult was a duel. Someone cut him off in traffic. That was war. A barista got his name wrong. Treason. His dog barked at a squirrel. Personal betrayal. Barry prided himself on his quick comebacks. I don't take crap from anyone, he'd say proudly. But what he never admitted was this: he took everything. Took it in. Internalized it. Let it ferment into a bitter soup of defensiveness and rage. He didn't need enemies. He made one out of every passing stranger. Now let me ask you something uncomfortable. When someone offends you, is it truly about them or about what they poked in you? This is where the unshakable mind begins to separate itself. Not in strength, not in speed, but in how it handles energy. There's a martial art called Aikido, gentle, elegant, almost absurd to watch. Instead of blocking an attacker, the Aikido master redirects the energy. He flows with the strike, turning the opponent's force against them without violence. The attacker ends up on the floor confused, and the master still balanced, still calm. This isn't just a martial art, it's an emotional strategy. Let's call it emotional Aikido. It means you don't block, you don't fight. You redirect the emotion so it doesn't enter you like a poison arrow. When someone throws anger your way, you don't catch it like a hot potato. You watch it sail past. You don't respond with, "How dare you?" You respond with, that's interesting." You don't argue to defend your ego. You let your stillness become the answer. And trust me, nothing confuses an aggressive person more than a target that refuses to fight back. Let's test this with a fictional scene. Imagine you're at dinner with your family. Uncle Rob, who lives for conflict, drops a comment. Maybe if you worked harder, you'd have a real career by now. The table goes quiet. Your fork pauses in midair. All eyes on you, your old self fires up. "You think you know my life?" Rob Q shouting match indigestion. And your aunt fake coughing into her sangria. But your new self breathes. Looks Rob in the eye and says, "Interesting perspective, Rob." Thanks for sharing. Then returns to eating, smiling. What happens next? Rob implodes in confusion. He didn't get what he came for your reaction. You used emotional Aikido. You deflected. You didn't let his energy set the tone. Now a disclaimer. This isn't about being passive-aggressive. It's not about being smug or pretending you're above everyone. It's about choice. Choosing not to get pulled into other people's chaos. Choosing to guard your energy like it's sacred because it is. The moment you realize that not everything deserves your emotional participation is the moment you stop being so easily puppeteered. A strong mind knows that reaction is expensive. Every time you react, you give someone else a little piece of your control. They press a button, and like a machine, you respond. That's power, but it isn't yours. Let me offer you something radical. You don't owe anyone a reaction. Not the guy on Twitter, not the ex who texts at midnight, not the coworker who loves backhanded compliments, not even your inner critic. You can see it. Name it, let it float by like trash on a river, and keep paddling. That's what unshakable minds do. Here's a calming truth. Most people don't want the truth. They want a reaction, because reactions are predictable. Reactions tell them how to control you. Reactions give them a story. But when you don't give them that story, when you replace drama with stillness, you become unreadable. And unreadable people are powerful. Let's revisit Barry, our fictional volcano. Barry eventually burnt out. His rage exhausted him. His friends stopped inviting him. He had high blood pressure, low patience, and no understanding of why life felt like a battlefield. Then one day he watched a duck. Yes, a duck. Someone threw bread at the duck. Missed. The duck blinked. Glided across the pond. Unbothered. Barry stared. What if I could do that? He whispered. He went home, sat on his porch, and for the first time in years, didn't reply to a snarky comment online. It felt like drinking cold water in hell. That was his first move. It wasn't graceful, but it was movement. And that's all you need. So here's your invitation. This week, pick one moment, just one, where you would normally react, but don't. Breathe instead. Tilt your inner energy like an Aikido master. Let the moment pass through you instead of into you. Then ask yourself afterward, what did I protect by staying calm? The answer might be your peace, your dignity, your blood pressure, or even better, your power. The goal isn't to become untouchable, it's to become unbaitable. You'll still feel, still ache, still burn sometimes, but you'll no longer hand your emotional remote to whoever presses the loudest button. You'll sit with the storm, drink your tea, and let the wind scream itself out. That's emotional Aikido. And that's the next layer of your terrifying mind. Part 5. Radical self-honesty, the strength no one dares try. Imagine this. A man stands in front of his mirror, shirtless, stomach hanging over his belt. He flexes, sucks in his gut, tilts his head just so. Looking good, he says. Then puts on a compression shirt, a too-tight blazer, and heads out to give a motivational talk titled, The Power of Discipline. This man is fictional, completely made up. Let's call him Derek. But Derek's story is painfully familiar, not just because of the hypocrisy, but because he believed the lie he told himself. And that, my friend, is the most dangerous lie of all. See, most people aren't afraid of being wrong in public. They're afraid of being wrong in private. In front of the mirror. In front of their own damn conscience. Because that kind of honesty, that kind of ruthless, undiluted, brutal truth-telling to yourself, that's scary. Why? Because once you admit the truth, you can no longer hide behind the excuse. Let's define it gently. Radical self-honesty doesn't mean shaming yourself. Doesn't mean staring into your soul screaming liar every 5 minutes. It means being willing to sit quietly with the parts of yourself that make you cringe. It means replacing defense mechanisms with clarity. And it means asking questions most people are too scared to whisper. Am I actually trying? Or just pretending to try? Do I really want this? Or do I just want to be seen, wanting it? Did I say that to help them? Or to feel superior? Questions like these are emotional exfoliants. They scrape away the ego's dead skin. And underneath, a mind that's stronger because it's honest. Here's a truth that stings. If you lie to yourself long enough, you start needing others to believe it, or you collapse. That's why so many people get angry when challenged. It's not because the criticism is false. It's because it's too true and they're not ready to face it. But if you want a terrifyingly strong mind, one that people respect without ever raising your voice, then you have to stop outsourcing your truth. You have to become your own judge, jury, and emotional janitor. Let me introduce a fictional character, Talia. Talia had been telling herself she was just bad at relationships. She dated the same kind of emotionally distant partner over and over, always ending with the same story. They weren't ready for someone like me. But one afternoon, while journaling half-heartedly in a cafe, she asked herself, what if I choose people who can't love me? Because deep down, I'm afraid of being fully seen. That question ruined her coffee. She didn't write anything else. She just sat there staring at the half-melted ice in her latte, realizing she'd been protecting her ego, not her heart. And that moment, not therapy, not a podcast, not a vision board, that moment cracked her open. Because radical honesty will either break your illusions or you. Here's a fun, uncomfortable exercise. Think of something you complain about often. Now ask, what part of this is my responsibility? Not blame, not shame, just responsibility. If you hate your job, is it the job or your fear of applying elsewhere? If your friend group is toxic, is it them or your addiction to being needed? If your art isn't growing, is it lack of talent or your refusal to finish anything? You don't have to tweet these answers. You don't even have to tell anyone. But you owe it to yourself not to live inside a polished lie, because you can't fix what you won't face, and what you won't face owns you. Now, before you think this is all emotional masochism, let me reassure you. Radical honesty isn't about hating yourself. It's about freeing yourself. Because once you see yourself clearly, you no longer fear being exposed. You stop needing to convince others you're good or smart or evolved because you already know where you stand. That's terrifying power. Not because it dominates others, but because it makes you undefeatable from within. Let's bring back Derek, our delusional self-help speaker. After years of denial, Derek one day missed a flight because he spent 30 minutes angling his bathroom selfie for motivational Instagram content. He stared at the photo. He didn't look strong. He looked strained. He sat down. He deleted the picture. Then he did something radical. He wrote a post. Today I realized I've been more interested in appearing disciplined than being disciplined. So I'm logging off to go sweat for real. No likes, no applause, but in that moment, Derek finally met himself. And strangely, he didn't hate what he saw. Here's your invitation tonight or tomorrow, or whenever you're brave, sit quietly and ask, where am I faking it not to perform? Not to fix it immediately, just to see it. Because even just that glimpse can begin a chain reaction of truth that nothing can stop. And once you've tasted radical self-honesty, mediocrity can't seduce you, delusion can't trap you, and approval, it becomes optional. The strongest minds aren't always the loudest or the most polished or the most quoted. They're the ones who face themselves in the dark and don't flinch. So tonight, if you're aching to grow, don't look out there. Look in here. You might not like what you see, but you'll finally know who you're becoming. And that is terrifying in all the right ways. Part 6, the art of controlled withdrawal. There's a story, obviously false, as all the best ones are about a monk named Marvin. Marvin lived on a hill just outside a city that never slept. The city roared with noise, scrolling drama, dating apps, debates, ambition, TikTok remixes, and unsolicited opinions. And Marvin. He had a hut, a robe, and a habit of vanishing mid-conversation. People climbed the hill to ask him for advice. Marvin. How do I deal with my enemies? Marvin would listen. Blink, say nothing, and then walk away. No grand exit, no explanation. Just silence, and a soft rustling of his robe in the wind. People called him rude, selfish, pretentious, but secretly deep down they were unsettled, because Marvin did what most of us are terrified to do. Leave the room before the applause or the argument. Let's talk about controlled withdrawal, not ghosting, not disappearing forever in a puff of I deserve peace glitter, but intentional disengagement, not to punish, but to preserve. Because here's a truth many never learn. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't fighting or fixing. It's walking away before you're drained. Most of us have been trained to believe that staying equals loyalty. That finishing every conversation proves maturity. That responding to every message is polite. That explaining yourself to the bitter end is noble. But what if it's just insecurity? What if your need to stay is really a fear of being misunderstood? What if the real strength lies not in staying to defend your peace, but in knowing you don't need to? Let me introduce you to a fictional woman named Arya. Arya was a corporate executive who hated confrontations, so she stayed in them. She'd write 3-paragraph Slack replies. She'd reread emails 17 times. She'd practice conversations in the shower, in traffic, in her nightmares. Then one day, during a completely unnecessary 10-person Zoom debate about font choices, she clicked leave meeting mid-sentence. She expected guilt. Instead, she felt euphoria. Not because she quit, but because for the first time she didn't argue to be right. She exited to be free. Controlled withdrawal is not an act of avoidance, it's an act of emotional maturity. It says I could argue, but I'd rather not lose my day. I could explain, but my peace is not a public debate. I could stay, but my silence has more dignity than this discussion. It's a recognition that your energy is not infinite, and that sometimes your presence is the gift and your absence is the boundary. Of course, this comes with discomfort. You'll be called cold, selfish, insensitive, especially by those who only understand connection through control. But hear this gently, you are not responsible for the version of you that lives in someone else's head. You are responsible for how long you linger in rooms that dim your light. Let's borrow a term from physics: potential energy. It's the power something holds just by being in the right position. A rock at the top of a hill doesn't have to move to be dangerous. It just needs to sit still in the right place and wait for the moment. The same goes for you. Withdrawal isn't weakness. It's potential and energy, strategic stillness. A way of telling the world, I'm not gone. I'm just not wasting myself here. Now, how do you know when to withdraw? Listen for these cues. You're explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You're defending your boundaries more than living inside them. You feel physically tense before opening a message. You're not being heard, you're being consumed. You leave conversations feeling smaller. When you feel that internal shrink, it's not always time to fight. Sometimes it's time to leave. Softly, deliberately, with your soul intact. Remember Marvin, our monk of mid-sentence exits? He didn't leave because he didn't care. He left because he did. He cared about his presence, about what it meant to give attention fully, about how precious it is to offer silence instead of noise. And if you watch people closely, you'll notice that those who leave gently often teach the deepest lessons. Not because they made a point, but because they didn't need to. So here's your practice. Pick one place in your life where you're staying too long. A draining thread of arguments. A friend group that only talks about the same 4 complaints. A platform that feels like a megaphone for everyone's insecurity. And quietly pull back. No announcement, no explosion, just a soft step away. Then watch what happens, not to them, but to you. Notice the return of breath, of clarity, of energy that no longer leaks, and smile. Because you've just mastered something most never will. The exit made in silence is often louder than any final word. Controlled withdrawal is not a retreat from life. It's a statement: I choose where my mind lives. I choose what I carry. And I choose who gets to see my face, not out of fear, but out of intention. That's not selfish. That's sacred. And it's terrifying in the best way. Part 7. Becoming unoffendable. A mind that can't be touched. There was once a man named Todd. Todd, who does not exist, was offended by everything. The internet, the weather, memes. He once left a yoga class because someone said namaste with the wrong tone. He didn't have enemies, he had triggers, dozens of them. His life was a pinball machine of offense, and he was the flipper, always ready to launch. And yet Todd believed himself to be enlightened. Why? Because he knew how to articulate his offense. I'm just expressing boundaries, he'd say, before launching into a 12-tweet thread about how someone's salad choice invalidated his healing journey. But here's the irony: the more easily offended you are, the more control the world has over your mind. Let's pause and sit with something spicy. What if offense is often more about ego than ethics? What if it's not that they shouldn't say that, but rather you didn't like what it stirred in you? Now don't get defensive. See what I did there? This isn't about tolerating abuse or pretending to be okay with cruelty. But there's a difference between defending your dignity and defending your ego's hair-trigger sensitivity. And somewhere along the way, many people forgot the difference. Let's introduce a fictional woman named Elise. Elise was once called too emotional during a heated meeting. She froze, felt hot shame crawl up her neck. Her brain began writing monologues for the car ride home. You don't get to call me emotional, you beige-shirted gaslighter. You should meditate with your mouth shut. But then something remarkable happened. Elise paused, breathed, asked herself, is this true? Am I emotional? And if so, why is that a problem? Suddenly the comment didn't sting. It didn't vanish, but it lost its grip. It became data, not a dagger. That was the beginning of her unoffendability. Here's the thing no one tells you. To be offended is to grant someone else the authority to disturb your inner world. That doesn't mean you become a doormat. It means you become a fortress, not because nothing touches you, but because what touches you doesn't shake you. The Stoics had a phrase: you always have the power not to have an opinion. At first that sounds cold, even robotic. But think about it, when someone insults you, what's the first thing you do? You interpret, you assign meaning, you internalize, you say, that was disrespectful, and suddenly you're in battle. But what if you just didn't assign meaning? What if someone said, you're the worst, and you simply said, okay, not sarcastically, not defensively, just, okay, what then? The insult collapses, because most offense only exists if you build it in your own mind. Let's do an imaginary thought experiment. You walk into a room. 10 strangers stare at you. One says, you look ridiculous. Now imagine that person is your best friend. You might laugh. Now imagine they're your ex. You might snap. Now imagine they're a stranger. You might feel confused. Same words, different internal narratives. That's the proof. It's not the insult. It's the story you wrap around it. Let's bring back Todd, the offended oracle. Eventually, Todd reached a tipping point. He was arguing online with a 13-year-old about video game ethics when he realized something terrifying. He didn't know who he was without the feeling of being wronged. Offense had become his personality. Every insult was a performance. Every opinion that contradicted is a threat. He'd built a castle out of self-righteousness, and it was collapsing under its own pettiness. So Todd did something wild. He logged off. He sat on a park bench, watched ducks, ate a sandwich, and for the first time in years, he let himself feel bored instead of enraged. It was terrifying and beautiful, because under all that noise there was peace. Here's the truth. Being unoffendable isn't about being numb. It's about being anchored. Anchored in your values. Anchored in your self-worth. Anchored in the knowledge that people's projections aren't your possessions. You begin to understand that people lash out from their own wounds. And when you see that not with pity, but with clarity, you stop collecting their pain like it's your job. Here's your gentle challenge. This week, notice your first reaction to offense. Then, pause. Ask, what story am I telling myself right now? Is this actually about me or about them? Can I let this pass without building a whole courtroom in my head? And most importantly, do I want to spend my energy here? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And the 10th time, you'll choose your response with intention, not impulsivity. That's real power. Offense is cheap, reaction is common. But stillness, that's rare. A still mind doesn't flinch, it doesn't bark back, it listens, it breathes, it selects. And when it finally speaks, people listen. Not because it's loud, but because it doesn't speak unless it matters. That's how you build a terrifying mind. Not one that attacks, but one that cannot be disturbed. So next time someone tries to insult you, discredit you, mislabel you, provoke you, don't take the bait. Be like water. Smile softly and let them fight with the wind. Part 8. Own nothing, control everything the Stoic way. There once lived a man named Casper. Not the friendly ghost, just a regular human guy, and fictional, of course. Casper had 3 phones, 2 assistants, and 1 personality split across 6 Instagram accounts. He didn't own much. Technically, nothing was in his name, but somehow he controlled it all. Casper had figured out something the rest of us were too emotionally entangled to admit: ownership isn't always power. Sometimes it's a trap. Now, before we dive deep, don't worry, this isn't a real estate seminar or a crypto pitch. This is about something subtler, something more haunting: your attachments. Because while Casper might have avoided taxes, the rest of us pay an even steeper price. We tether our peace to things we think we own, but that actually own us. You've seen it before, you've felt it. The friend who says, I can't lose this relationship, it's all I have. The artist who panics when their post gets low engagement. The worker who crumbles when the promotion goes to someone else. We don't say I wanted this, we say I need this. But do we? Or have we mistaken possession for purpose? Here's a wild Stoic truth bomb. You don't own anything. Not really, not your partner, not your job, not even your body. Wait, what? Breathe, let that sit. The Stoics weren't nihilists. They weren't saying detach and move to a cave. They were saying, if you can't lose it without losing yourself, you don't own it. It owns you. Let's meet another fictional figure, Sierra. Sierra was a rising star at her company. She had the corner office, the ergonomic chair, and exactly 7 types of teas labeled with her initials. Then one Thursday, everything was gone. Merger, layoffs, bye-bye tea. She sat on a park bench later that day, staring at the skyline that used to include her office view. At first panic, then quiet. Then something strange, freedom. Because for the first time, Sierra realized she'd mistaken her title for her identity, and now that it was gone, she was still breathing, still here, still her. You don't need to lose your job or get dumped to learn this. You can start now. Ask yourself, what in my life do I cling to like a life raft? What would I feel lost without? What do I think proves my worth? Whatever just popped into your mind, that's your teacher. And your invitation to let go just enough to become unshakable. Let's bring in a fictional parable. A man owned a beautiful porcelain cup. He drank from it every morning, admiring its delicate design. One day, his friend asked, "Do you worry it might break?" The man smiled. "I consider it broken already. That way I enjoy it fully without fear." That right there is Stoic detachment. Not coldness, not apathy, just the ability to love something without chaining your soul to it. Here's the paradox. The less you cling, the more you command. That's what makes this terrifying. A person who needs nothing from you is the hardest person to manipulate. A mind that isn't tethered to outcome is the freest mind in the room. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means your care isn't conditional. Imagine you're playing chess. You move with purpose. You try to win. But then someone flips the board. If you scream, throw the pieces, or chase them down the hall, you were never playing for joy or strategy. You were playing for ego. But if you shrug, reset the board, and say, again, you've already won. Because your piece wasn't attached to the game. It was inside you. That's power. That's terror for those who rely on your neediness. Let's return to Casper. One day, his empire crumbled not from scandal, but boredom. He gave it all away, the phones, the passwords, the meetings. Then he walked into the library, got a part-time job, and started reading Marcus Aurelius. People said he'd lost everything. But Casper, he felt lighter than he ever had. Because when you control yourself, you don't need to control the world. And when you don't need the world, you're impossible to threaten. Here's your practice. Pick one thing you cling to emotionally, not physically. Maybe it's the need to always be right. Maybe it's the approval of someone who never claps for you. Maybe it's the image of yourself as the strong one. Now imagine losing it. Yes, really. Visualize it gone. What's left now? Breathe into that space. Aoi. That's the real you. That's the part no one can take. Owning nothing doesn't mean living with nothing. It means living with grace, with the ability to hold things gently, not grip them to death, to love without ownership, to strive without clinging, to build without fear of collapse. Because here's the secret, the person who has nothing to prove, holds the most invisible power of all, and that more than success status or security is what makes a mind truly terrifying, in the best possible way. Part 9. Thinking in Decades, Not Days. There once lived a man named Leo. Leo, as imaginary as a gym membership in December, believed in speed. He microwaved everything, refused to watch TV shows unless they were 2x speed bingeable, bought self-help books and skimmed only the bold headlines. And every Monday morning, Leo would write a 5-year life plan and abandon it by lunchtime. Leo wasn't lazy, he was chronically addicted to urgency. One day, while doom-scrolling motivation reels, he stumbled across a quote, "Don't think in days, think in decades." He laughed. Who has time for decades? Then he refreshed the page and forgot it completely. But let's sit with that idea for a moment. What happens to your mind when you stop measuring growth in days and start measuring in decades? This is where most people panic. We are a species trained to sprint, not endure, to fix, hack, shortcut, and optimize. We want six-pack abs by next Friday and inner peace by lunchtime. But powerful minds don't rush. They move like glaciers, quiet, relentless, unstoppable. Let's consider a fictional woman named Noor. Noor wanted to write a novel. She dreamed of it, obsessed over it, and every time she tried, she'd quit around page 12. Why? Because it wasn't perfect yet. Then one day, Noor made a strange vow to herself: I'll write 1 page a day for 10 years. No expectations, no publishers, no pressure, just a page each day. A decade later, she didn't just have a novel, she had a library. Because Noor stopped measuring herself by speed and started honoring pace. This is the paradox of slowness. The slower you move, the deeper your roots. And deep roots, they survive storms that speed cannot. Modern culture teaches us to chase everything. Go get it, hustle harder, now or never. But what if that mindset is the very reason so many people feel so unstable? What if chasing speed is how we stay trapped in shallow soil? Here's a gentle truth. Impatience is often a disguise for fear. Fear that we're behind. Fear that we're not enough yet. Fear that if it takes too long, maybe it was never meant for us. But strong minds know time is not the enemy, it's the training ground. Let's tell a fictional story from ancient times. There was once a sculptor who took a year to carve a single nose on a statue. When asked why he worked so slowly, he replied, "Because this statue will be here long after I'm gone. I'd rather be forgotten by name than remembered by my haste." No one remembers his name, but his statue still stands. When you start thinking in decades, something magical happens. You stop needing applause right now. You stop comparing your timeline to people on social media. You stop obsessing over weekly results. And instead, you begin to build things that last, like trust, like depth, like a reputation that doesn't flicker with every opinion. Because nothing truly great was ever rushed. Let's go back to Leo, the fast-forward king. One day he burned out. Not in a dramatic blaze, just a slow erosion. His attention span disappeared, his relationships thinned, his passion replaced by exhaustion. So he did something bizarre. He planted a bonsai tree. He didn't even like plants, but he watered it, trimmed it, waited. After a year, the tree looked mostly the same. But Leo didn't. Because in caring for something that couldn't be rushed, he accidentally began caring for a part of himself that he'd long ignored: his capacity to wait. Thinking in decades doesn't mean moving slowly on purpose. It means thinking long, living long, loving long. It's the difference between saying, I want to be successful next month, and saying, I want to be the kind of person who can carry success for 30 years. It's the difference between writing a viral tweet and writing something that people still quote after you're gone. Here's a question worth asking. If you knew success was guaranteed in 10 years, what would you begin doing today without rush or panic? That question breaks people, because without the thrill of instant results, most people don't know what's truly meaningful to them. But strong minds, they build for the long game, and that's terrifying because no one can outpace them. You can't burn out a glacier. You can only wait for it to reshape the landscape. Here's your invitation. Pick one area of your life, just one, and start thinking in decades. Not what do I want next week, but what kind of parent, artist, leader, friend do I want to be in 10 years? What habits will still matter when I'm 70? What relationships am I willing to nurture like a forest, not a fire? Then begin. Not frantically, but faithfully. Thinking in decades isn't passive, it's powerful. It's a refusal to be ruled by panic. A declaration that your path doesn't need to be loud, flashy, or immediate. It just needs to be yours. So slow down. Zoom out. Let others chase fast goals. You're sculpting legacies. One page, one move, one decade at a time. Part 10. Strategic vulnerability. Show but only what you choose. There once lived a man named Jasper who, according to absolutely no one, was the most emotionally available guy in town. Every first date, he would pour out his childhood traumas by the appetizer. By dessert, he had already sent 3 voice notes explaining how raw he was feeling. Vulnerability is strength, he declared, and then cried into his creme brulee when the 3rd date ghosted him. Poor Jasper. He didn't understand that vulnerability is powerful, not because it is open, but because it is strategic. Let's pause and ask something uncomfortable. Is your vulnerability a gift or a leaky faucet? Modern culture has turned being vulnerable into a kind of performance art. Oversharing is mistaken for intimacy. Trauma dumping is mistaken for connection. And self-exposure is confused with self-awareness. But strong minds, they know something subtler. Powerful vulnerability is not about being seen. It's about choosing when, where, and how to be seen. Let's meet someone else, Mia. Mia was a therapist who had endured a difficult divorce, but she never mentioned it in sessions. Until one day a client said, I just feel like no one really understands. Mia paused. Then gently she said, there was a time I felt that too. That was it. No gory details. No journal entries. No hashtag confessionals. Just a crack in the armor, deliberate, measured, and enough for the other person to feel seen. That's strategic vulnerability. Here's a truth to tattoo on your soul. If you reveal everything, no one will know what matters. And more dangerously, if you reveal too soon, people may connect to your pain, but not respect your strength. Because vulnerability is not just what you share, it's how you hold it when you do. Let's use a metaphor. Imagine your life is a house. Every room is a story. Some rooms are cozy, some are messy, some are still under construction. Now, when someone visits, do you throw open every door, or do you say, let me show you the living room first? Strategic vulnerability is knowing which rooms are ready, which ones are sacred, and which ones are no one's business yet. Now, let's talk danger. Oversharing is often a trauma response in disguise. It's the mind saying, if I show you everything, maybe you won't leave. It's control wrapped in transparency. It feels brave, but it's often a defense mechanism. Because true vulnerability, the kind that builds connection and respect, requires one thing most people never train timing. Let's revisit Jasper, the emotionally exposed spaghetti man. One day he decided to say less. Not hide, just hold. He began to listen more. He stopped handing out his journal like a coupon flyer. Then something wild happened. People started leaning in, curious, interested, not because he was broken, but because he finally left space for mystery. And mystery, my friend, is magnetic. Here's a phrase to practice, I'll tell you more. When I trust the moment. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to honor your own story as something sacred, not a product. Because your pain isn't a party trick. Your healing isn't a marketing tool. And your truth deserves curation, not consumption. Let's fictionalize a warrior Asha. Asha was a battle-worn general in a world where emotional expression was seen as weakness. She held her grief like a stone in her pocket, always present, never flaunted. Then one night around a fire, a young soldier confessed, "I'm terrified I'll fail you." Asha didn't quote Stoicism. She didn't crack a joke. She reached into her tunic, pulled out the stone, and said, "I carry this for my brother. I still grieve him, and I still lead." No more words. The soldier never forgot that moment, not because Asha wept, but because she chose to show. That strategic vulnerability, it builds loyalty. It doesn't demand it. Let's bring it home. If you want a mind so strong it terrifies people, you must learn how to be honest without bleeding, how to connect without collapsing, and how to reveal without surrendering the frame. You can say, "Yes, that hurt me," without saying, "Here are the 47 ways I'm still broken." You can say, "I've been through that," without building an altar to your wounds. You can say, "This is hard," and still stand tall. That's what makes people listen. That's what makes you unforgettable. Here's your invitation. This week, ask yourself, where do I confuse visibility with vulnerability? What am I oversharing to earn safety? What parts of me do I want to protect? Not because I'm hiding, but because they're mine. Then practice, say less with more presence. Show more, but only what's earned. Let mystery hold hands with truth, because you don't owe the world your scars. But when you choose to show them, let it be art, not a plea. A strong mind doesn't hide, but it doesn't beg to be seen either. It stands in the center of its story, quiet, certain, powerful, and when it speaks, it doesn't scream. It selects. That's terrifying, that's magnetic, that's you. Part 11, Psychological Warfare Outlasting, Not Outfighting. There was once a fictional man named Victor, a name that sounds like triumph. But ironically, Victor couldn't win an argument if it came with subtitles. He tried, though. Oh, did he try? Victor had a comeback for every insult, a data point for every opinion. He'd rehearse his clapbacks in the shower, sometimes out loud, sometimes with hand gestures. He saw every disagreement as a battle won he had to win. And yet, somehow, he always left exhausted, even when he was right. Why? Because Victor fought to out-argue, not to outlast. Let's break something gently. You don't need to win the fight. You need to survive the battlefield. The unshakable mind knows this. Most psychological warfare isn't about facts. It's about fatigue. Your opponent doesn't need to outsmart you. They just need to outlast your patience. And if your piece is short-fused, they've already won. This is the nature of invisible combat. It's the coworker who passive-aggressively replies all. It's the relative who doesn't mean it like that. It's the troll who wants you to defend your very existence. They want your energy, not your clarity, not your truth, just your attention, the most expensive thing you own. But here's the terrifying power move. Don't fight. Outlive. Let's meet another character. Farah. Farah ran a small business. Her competitor copied her product, undercut her prices, and spread rumors. Everyone said, clap back, call them out. Farah smiled. She improved her product, refined her messaging, and in private kept meticulous receipts, never to shame, but to stay aware. 2 years later, that competitor folded. Why? Because Farah didn't waste energy playing checkers. She played chess on a longboard. That's psychological warfare. Not explosive, but relentless. You don't need to bark to be respected. You don't need to argue to be heard. You just need to not go away, to remain, to become the storm others tire themselves out shouting at. Now let's address the elephant in the room, ego. Your ego will beg you to clap back, to defend your honor, to burn someone down with a 3-paragraph reply. Let it beg, let it scream into a pillow, then gently ask it, is this worth my energy, Bosi? Or is it just my pride doing push-ups? The ego wants victory. The mind wants endurance. Choose endurance. Here's a mental reframe. Not every attack needs a shield. Some just need time. Time will always expose what emotion tries to conceal. The person who lied time, the one who tried to sabotage time, the one who spread rumors time. Your job isn't to expose them. Your job is to outlast them with such quiet dignity that it unnerves them more than rage ever could. Let's revisit Victor, our fictional warrior of words. Eventually, Victor burned out, not from defeat, but from constant vigilance. He realized something horrifying. He wasn't living a life. He was living a courtroom. And then one day, during a debate about pineapple on pizza, he stopped mid-sentence and said, "You know what? You might be right." And meant it. Not because he agreed, but because he no longer needed to win. That was the day Victor won everything. Here's your challenge this week when someone tries to provoke you. Don't react, not out of fear, not out of silence as a weapon. Just observe, breathe, say less, sleep on it. Most things shrink in the morning. And if it still matters, move with strategy, not spite. Because spite is satisfying for a second. Strategy reshapes everything in the long run. Let's imagine your peace like a candle in a hurricane. You can scream at the wind, or you can shield the flame. One burns out, one survives. That's the war. Every day, every conversation, every button someone pushes. And the terrifying mind, the truly formidable one, is the one that doesn't flinch, doesn't fold, doesn't explode. It just continues. Calm, calculated, unmoved. Here's a final visual. 2 generals meet on a battlefield. One shouts, the other listens. One insults, the other nods. One storms off, the other remains. Guess who history remembers? Not the loudest, but the one who outlasted. You don't have to fight every battle. You just have to remain so rooted, so stable that the war gives up before you do. Let others exhaust themselves. You've got decades to build, a legacy to protect, and peace that doesn't respond to nonsense. That's psychological warfare, and you've already begun. Part 12, the fear you evoke without trying. There is a stillness in some people that unsettles others, not because it's threatening, but because it cannot be moved. They don't need to be right. They don't need to be heard. They don't need to be chosen. And that absence of need terrifying. There once lived a woman named Irina, a fictional character yet more real than most. She never argued, she didn't gossip. When conflict rose, she'd pause not to plan a comeback, but to breathe. Not a performance, not a tactic, just breath. People didn't know what to make of her. Some whispered, "She's cold." Others said, "She must think she's better than us." But the truth, Irina had made peace with something most people avoid. She didn't fear being misunderstood, and because she feared so little, others feared her without even realizing why. Let's settle into something slow now. Let's let the words move like warm water, not to wake you, but to wash you. You've traveled far in this series, you've met shadows, you've met fictions, you've met parts of yourself. And now at the quiet end, you meet what all of this was building toward a presence. A presence so deep that it doesn't demand, so calm that it unnerves, so sincere that it frightens those still wearing masks. You don't need to try to be this. You've been trying your whole life, and isn't that exhausting? No. This final step is not about more effort. It's about allowing stillness, allowing breath, allowing yourself to exist without proving anything. Because the terrifying mind isn't one that roars, it's one that whispers and still shifts the room. Let me tell you a story that never happened. There was a village built by a lake. People argued constantly about crops, taxes, who said what to whom. At the edge of the village lived an old man. No one knew his name. He never joined the debates, never raised his voice, just sat by the lake day after day watching the wind skim the water. One day, the village council invited him to speak. He declined. Why not, they asked. He looked at them kindly, then said, "Because when you are done talking, you will hear the water." They didn't understand. But later that night, someone stood by the lake. They heard the stillness, and for the first time in their life felt no urge to interrupt it. You are becoming that lake. Your stillness is no longer a pose, it's a place, a home. Not for performance, not for praise, but for peace. Like the fear you evoke now, it's not fear of harm, it's fear of mirror. Because when someone cannot shake you, they must sit with themselves. And many aren't ready for that. They fidget, they provoke. They try to pull you back into chaos, not out of malice, but because your calm confronts their storm. And yet you remain. That is the most beautiful defiance of all. So tonight, or whenever these words find you, let them not hype you up, but soften you. You are not here to perform your strength. You are here to rest in it. Close your eyes maybe, notice your breath. Not a perfect breath, just yours. No one is asking for you to prove anything now. No reaction required, no defense, just this moment. And your quiet, terrifying mind. People may never understand your calm. They may mistake it for arrogance or distance or ice. Let them. Because the mind you've built through silence, truth, restraint, long view, unoffendability, and the quiet refusal to break was never meant to be liked. It was meant to be lived in, like a mountain, like an ocean, like sleep. So rest now, there's nothing more to do. You've already become someone no one can shake. Not because you're hard, but because you're whole. And that, more than any words, achievements, or victories, is what terrifies people most. A mind at peace, unmoved, and finally, asleep. How to build a mind so strong. It terrifies people that you didn't just read a series. You walked through a quiet battlefield, not with armor, but with awareness. Each part of this journey peeled away the noise, the flinch, the need to be loud, liked, or right. In a world obsessed with quick wins and public displays of strength, you learned the terrifying truth. Power isn't noise. It's nerve. It's restraint. It's the ability to choose stillness when everything begs for reaction. You met fictional characters Victor, Irena, Jasper. Aria echoes of real people we've all been or feared becoming. You sat beside monks who walked away mid-sentence. You learned how emotional Aikido can silence an attacker without uttering a word. You practiced the art of withdrawal, the science of detachment, the magic of mystery. You stopped fighting and started outlasting. And perhaps most important, you learned that vulnerability is not about bleeding publicly, but about knowing when to open the door and when to let silence do the talking. Now the mind you've built doesn't bark. It doesn't beg. It doesn't break easily. It doesn't need to be seen, and yet it's unforgettable. Because the most formidable minds don't intimidate with force. They unsettle with stillness. So here at the end, rest. You don't need to do more. You don't need to prove anything. Let the world wonder, because the work is done. You are calm. You are deliberate. You are terrifying in all the most beautiful ways. And now, you may sleep.